The sound of the glass door sliding open cut through the cold Manhattan morning like a clean slice. In that instant, a figure stepped inside, not a hurried customer, not a business executive in a $1,000 suit. It was Marcus Ellison, and in just a few minutes, everyone in this Crown Bank branch would learn who he really was. Warm golden light from the towering windows spilled across the polished marble floor, reflecting off gleaming leather shoes and perfectly tailored grey suits. The air was filled with the hum of money counters, the soft clatter of keyboards, and the polite laughter of tellers. Everything ran like a well-oiled machine. But Marcus knew that glossy image was only a mask. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up one notch, dark jeans and spotless white sneakers. No tie, no luxury watch, no ostentatious posture. To the unknowing eye, he could have been just an ordinary man, stopping in to withdraw a bit of spending cash. He stepped into line, drumming his fingers lightly on the edge of the wooden counter. From where he stood, Marcus could see a white man with salt and pepper hair, dressed in a navy blazer, accepting neat stacks of fresh $100 bills from a teller. Jonathan Price. "Thank you, sir. Have a wonderful day." The teller beamed. "How much did you take out?" someone murmured behind him. $25 grand. Easier than buying a cup of coffee." Jonathan shrugged, slipping the cash into his briefcase and walking out without anyone asking for additional documents. Marcus inhaled slowly, letting the cold air fill his lungs. He had seen this scene hundreds of times, but today he wasn't going to let it pass. As Jonathan's figure disappeared through the glass doors, Marcus stepped up to window number 4. The nameplate gleamed under the LED light. Emily Rogers, teller. "Good morning," Marcus said with a faint smile. Emily only glanced at him, without even a nod. "Fill this out." She slid a withdrawal slip and a ballpoint pen toward him, her tone sharp as a paper cut. Marcus said nothing, took a seat at the desk, and wrote with quick, neat strokes. Withdrawal, $15,000. He attached his driver's license and pushed it back to her. Emily's eyes flicked to the number. In just a second, the corner of her mouth curled into a cold, thin line. She folded the slip and pushed it back toward him. "We can't process this transaction." Marcus raised his brows. "Excuse me. I just saw the customer before me withdraw $25,000 without a single question." "That case was different," Emily said, folding her arms, standing tall as if daring him to give up. Different how? The question rang in Marcus's mind, but he voiced it aloud. Different? In what specific way? Emily's eyes shifted toward the glass office in the corner. Behind the transparent door, branch manager Linda Moore was watching. A slight nod from Linda seemed to steel Emily's resolve. "I told you we can't process it. And I'm still asking, why?" Marcus replied, his voice level, not rising a decibel, yet each word as clear as the strike of a gavel. Emily tapped her nails against the counter, each click sharp and dry. "Withdrawing this much cash, it's unusual. Under anti-money laundering regulations, this transaction is suspicious." The word suspicious dropped into the air like a formal charge. Marcus felt it strike something deep, the memory of having to prove he was legitimate simply because of the color of his skin. He tilted his head, eyes fixed on hers. Suspicious based on what? The amount? Or the person withdrawing it? A flicker of hesitation passed over Emily's face, gone in an instant. I don't make the rules. No, but you know how to apply them, selectively, Marcus said, his voice still calm but steel beneath. Emily took a sharp breath and turned away. I'll get the manager. As she disappeared into the glass office, Marcus remained still. The clatter of keyboards, the click of heels, the low murmur of customers. Everything seemed to slow. At the customer service desk, a woman named Karen Mitchell glanced at him, forced a polite smile, then looked away. The office door swung open. Linda stepped out, her stride quick but deliberate, heels striking the marble floor like the final periods of a contract. Good morning, sir, she said, her voice smooth but distant. I understand you're looking to withdraw a large sum. That's correct? I'm sorry, but for transactions like this, we have to apply additional verification procedures. Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if leafing through an invisible contract in his mind. Additional procedures? What exactly does that mean in my case? We need to confirm the source of funds and review your most recent deposit history, Linda said, her tone like she was reading from an internal policy manual. Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose. You have my account information right in front of you. Go ahead and look it up. I need your cooperation, Mr. Ellison, Linda said, her voice beginning to harden. Marcus let out a short, humorless chuckle. I'm cooperating as much as possible. This isn't compliance. This is profiling. The word profiling hit the air, making a few nearby customers pause mid-signature. Linda and Emily froze for half a beat. Then Linda gestured toward the door. A large man in a security uniform, Tom Harris, approached, his face as expressionless as a control panel without any lights. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, Tom said evenly. Marcus turned to Aftuosul to face him, searching for a trace of doubt in his eyes, but found none. I'm a customer here. Last chance, sir. Please step outside. Marcus drew in a deep breath, pulled out his phone, and started recording. You're refusing my transaction, even though I've provided ID, account information, and you just processed a larger withdrawal for a white customer right before me. The muscle in Tom's jaw twitched. Linda's lips tightened. But Tom simply repeated, "Step outside." And before Marcus could move, Tom's broad hand gripped his arm and yanked hard. The world spun halfway, his shoulder slamming into the door frame with a dull thud. The door swung wide, and a second later, Marcus was shoved out into the street, cold wind slapping his face. His ID card skittered across the sidewalk, landing with a sharp clack. Marcus bent to pick it up, but another hand was quicker. The second security guard, Derek Vaughan, scooped it up, brushed off the dust, and handed it over. This place, it's still the same, Derek said quietly, his deep voice carrying a history that needed no telling. Degrees, titles, none of it matters. They just need a reason to push you out. Marcus gripped the card tightly. Behind the glass, the bank kept running as if nothing had happened. But he knew. The storm had just begun. The January wind in Manhattan is never gentle. It cuts through coats, seeps into bone, and makes even the steadiest people shiver. But for Marcus Ellison, the chill in his body came not only from the weather, it came from the shove moments ago. from the blank stare of a system he himself had built and thought he had under control. He reached up to adjust the collar of his crisp white shirt, his eyes still locked on the glass doors of Crown Bank. Inside, customers continued to queue, tellers kept offering polite smiles, and branch manager Linda Moore returned to her office as though nothing had happened. Emily sat back down, fingers tapping the keyboard, ignoring the storm gathering just outside. Marcus pulled out his phone, his fingers moving swiftly to a familiar number. 3 rings. Anthony Wells. Anthony, I need you at Branch 5 right now. What happened? I was just thrown out of my own bank by security, and Linda Moore gave the order. A brief pause on the other end. Yeah. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Marcus put his phone away, leaning against the cold stone wall. His gaze like a blade piercing through the glass, pinning itself on Linda. He was not the kind of man to create a scene in public. But there are days when silence is nothing more than complicity. Linda sank back into her chair, trying to steady her heartbeat. Emily stood by the desk, her voice still trembling slightly, though she tried to sound certain. Do you think there really was something wrong with him? Absolutely, Linda nodded, as if to reassure herself. No one withdraws that much cash without notice, unless... She left the sentence unfinished, letting the listener fill in the rest. But deep inside, Linda felt uneasy. The way Marcus had looked directly into her eyes, the way his voice hadn't risen yet, made her feel as if she were being cross-examined before an inquiry. It unsettled her. Mr. Ellison. Derek Vaughan, the second security guard, still stood nearby, his voice low and deliberate. I've worked here for 6 years. This isn't the first time I've seen something like this, and I know it'll get buried if no one does anything. Marcus studied him and saw in his eyes something familiar. The weariness of a man who had witnessed too many injustices but stayed silent to keep his job. Will you stand with me? Marcus asked plainly. If you need a statement, I'll tell the truth, Derek replied without hesitation. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb, braking smoothly. The door opened and Anthony Wells stepped out. Charcoal suit, deep blue tie, eyes cold as ice. Passers-by didn't know he was the executive vice president of Crown Bank, but the way he walked made it clear he was a man of authority. Marcus, Anthony strode over. Who did this? Marcus pointed toward the glass doors. Linda Moore and her staff. The reason? They called it security protocol, but in reality it was profiling. Anthony turned and walked straight into the bank. The glass door opened, but did not close immediately. Marcus followed closely behind. The sound inside the branch seemed to drop a notch when Anthony appeared. Linda looked up, briefly startled to see him with Marcus. Mr. Wells, Ms. Moore, Anthony cut in, his voice carrying the weight of a command. A moment ago, you refused to process a transaction for the CEO of Crown Bank. Emily stiffened, eyes wide. A wave of murmurs rippled through the line of waiting customers. Linda forced down her rising panic. Perhaps there's a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding here, Anthony said, stepping closer, his tone low but sharp as a blade. Let me ask you directly, did you check his account before making your decision? Linda glanced at Emily, then back at Anthony. I hadn't yet. So no, Anthony concluded firmly. You just violated Section 4.3 of Crown Bank's customer service protocol, which requires that any transaction over 10,000 be verified using account data, not the feeling of an employee. Linda tried one last defense. But his behavior— You're trying to justify bias, Anthony interrupted again. And you will explain that to human resources right now. As the tension mounted, Derek stepped forward, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by everyone. I'm a witness. I saw Mr. Ellison present his ID and a completed withdrawal slip. I also saw the previous customer withdraw $25,000 without a single question. If needed, I'll sign a statement. A wave of silence rolled across the lobby. Those who had only been watching now straightened, wanting to witness the outcome. Anthony took a measured breath, then spoke, each word stamped with finality. Ms. Moore, you are suspended immediately. Effective now. HR will contact you regarding termination. And if I find this wasn't the first time, our legal team will take it from there. Emily stood frozen. Linda opened her mouth, but no words came out. Marcus stepped to the counter, his voice calm. Now, I'll proceed with my request. No one dared delay. Another teller quickly processed the transaction, the money counter humming as crisp $100 bills stacked neatly in front of Marcus. He gathered them, then separated one stack and slid it toward Derek. Take the rest of the day off. Consider it thanks for telling the truth. Derek hesitated for a moment, then accepted, gratitude shining in his eyes. Thank you, Marcus. Marcus turned to Linda, delivering one final line, light in tone but sharp enough to cut deep. You should check ID before making a decision. That's the most basic principle. Then he turned and walked out. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor like the final strikes in a courtroom verdict. The wind was still cold, but Marcus no longer felt it. He knew today's push against the system would not stop at just one branch. Anthony stepped out with him. This will be addressed at the root. I'm ordering a full review. Marcus nodded. Good. Because a bank can't claim to protect customers if it chooses who is worthy of service. The two men paused for a moment, looking back through the glass. Inside, customers still carried out their transactions, but the air had changed. And somewhere in there, Linda was packing her things, her eyes downcast. Marcus turned away, leaving behind the city's noise, and a costly lesson for anyone who thinks power only comes from the seat they occupy. It took less than 15 minutes for everything to spiral out of control at Crown Bank's Branch 5. Not because of the press, not because of a formal statement, but because of customers' phones. A young man who had been standing in line behind Marcus earlier had managed to hit record at the exact moment Tom Harris grabbed his arm and shoved him outside. The clip was under a minute long, but it had everything needed to make social media explode. Skin color, the withdrawal amount, the staff's attitude, and Marcus's line, "This isn't compliance. This is profiling," ringing out as clear as a slogan. Linda sat in her office, avoiding the eyes of anyone who walked past. Emily sat frozen at her station, fingers tapping the keyboard without remembering what she was typing. The murmurs grew louder. A young teller whispered to a colleague, "You know, he's actually the CEO. Marcus Ellison. I checked." "God," the other voice faltered. And they didn't need to be finished. Everyone understood. Within an hour, the clip had been shared thousands of times on Twitter, accompanied by the hashtag #profiling in banking. Comments poured in. Unbelievable this is happening in 2025. This is a CEO, but imagine if it were an ordinary person. Section 4.3 of Crown Bank was clearly violated. A well-known finance blogger pinned a tweet. The question isn't how they treated him as a CEO, but how many they've treated like this when no one knew who they were. Derek Vaughan, the second security guard, still stood outside, but his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket over and over. Friends, former colleagues, even family members were messaging. "Were you there? Was that really Marcus Ellison?" He looked through the glass and saw Linda with her head down, Anthony on the phone with someone, likely the executive board. Derek knew he had stepped into a space where there was no easy way back. Being a witness in a case involving senior leadership meant he would either be hailed as a hero or quietly pushed out. This time, he didn't intend to stay silent. That afternoon, Marcus was at Crown Bank's headquarters in the financial district. A 40-story glass tower, the gold-plated logo gleaming in the fading light. The elevator took him straight to the 38th floor, the executive level. Anthony was already waiting, a thick file on the table. "I've ordered the internal audit team to send a full report on Branch 5 within 24 hours, Anthony began. "And?" "Preliminary findings. There have been 3 complaints involving discriminatory behavior in the past 2 years. All were dismissed as lacking evidence." Marcus flipped through the pages, eyes scanning the text quickly. The investigator's notes repeated the phrase, "Unable to verify, subjective factors." He let out a humorless laugh. Subjective factors are the best shield for bias. Anthony nodded. "I've instructed legal to review the complaint, handling procedures. And I want to know, how do you plan to deal with Linda?" Marcus closed the file, leaning back in his chair. "Firing is just trimming the branches. I want a meeting with all branch managers, a reminder of Section 4.3, and an added clause: every transaction over $10,000 must have audio recorded and video archived for review to remove any claim of subjective judgment." That evening, a leading financial news network ran a special report. Crown Bank CEO denied transaction at the very bank he owns. The anchor replayed the clip, analyzed the internal policy, and brought in a financial law expert. The lawyer said, if Section 4.3 had been applied correctly, the employee would have been required to verify through the system before making a decision. Here, there are clear signs of procedural violation, and if discrimination is involved, Crown Bank could face a civil lawsuit. The next morning, Marcus attended a board meeting. An older board member spoke up. "We need to contain the damage. The stock is already down 2% since yesterday." Marcus replied simply, "The real damage isn't in this week's share price. It's in customer trust, and if we don't address this fully, that number won't stop at 2%. No one argued further. That afternoon, Linda received a call from HR officially informing her of her termination. Her voice trembled. I didn't mean," the HR representative cut her off. "The decision is final. Reason? Gross violation of Section 4.3, damaging the bank's reputation." As she hung up, Linda knew her 15-year banking career had just ended. 3 days after the incident, Crown Bank issued a public statement. enhancing transaction transparency, all branches to implement mandatory audio recording and video archiving for cash transactions of $10,000 or more. Marcus signed the statement, adding a note. Trust cannot be bought with quarterly profits. It exists only when every customer is treated equally. An email went out to all customers, a commitment to the new process, and a new hotline to report discrimination directly to the CEO's office. The inbox received over 300 responses in 24 hours, many sharing similar experiences, some from years ago but still carrying the sting of resentment. Marcus read every email. He realized his case was just one of hundreds, except this time it had been dragged into the light. In an interview afterward, Marcus said, "I don't want anyone to feel suspicious just because of how they look. A bank is a place for numbers, for data. If we ignore the data to judge the person, then we have failed." He knew the battle wasn't over. But once the story had passed through the bank's doors, it was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone who had ever been underestimated the moment they walked into a room. 4 days after the incident at Branch 5, the story of Marcus Ellison was no longer just the hottest headline on social media. It had become a subject of analysis on the desks of investors and in the strategy rooms of rival banks. On the 27th floor of Harper & Copil Bank headquarters, CEO Richard Harper set down a financial newspaper. A photo of Marcus, taken the moment he was shoved out the door by a security guard, filled the entire front page. "Is this an opportunity or a warning?" Richard asked his team of advisors. A PR specialist replied immediately, "Both. If Crown Bank loses customer trust, their market share in personal banking will drop. But if they handle the crisis well, this could be a stepping stone to increase their credibility." On the ticker board, Crown Bank's stock, CRB, slipped another 1.2% that morning. Not a huge drop, but enough to create hesitation. Short-term investment funds began adjusting their portfolios, some shifting capital to smaller, less controversial banks. A Bloomberg report cited an anonymous source. Crown Bank is facing a request for explanation from the Federal Banking Oversight Committee regarding their cash transaction handling process and anti-discrimination protocols. Anthony walked in, holding a printed email from the legal department. The Oversight Committee has sent a formal request for a report within 7 days. They want the full procedure for cash withdrawals over $10,000 and a breakdown of all denied cases in the past 24 months. Marcus set down his pen, eyes narrowing slightly. "Good. This is our chance to put everything in the open. But I want clean numbers, no polishing." "You're sure?" Anthony asked, slightly surprised. "I'm sure. If we hide anything, we're no better than Linda and Emily were that day, Mrs. Susan Lee, a Crown Bank customer of 18 years, was sitting in a cafe near her home when she saw the news feature on TV. She recalled an incident 3 years earlier when she tried to withdraw $12,000 to renovate her house and was told to wait for manager verification, despite having 10 times that amount in her savings. She looked into the reporter's camera and said firmly, "I stayed with Crown Bank because I trusted the brand. But if the CEO can't clean up his own system, I will withdraw every cent. Trust has a limit, just like a bank account." That same afternoon, the internal audit team began reviewing 50 key branches. They found 27 cases of transactions denied, with the reason listed as unusual transaction, but without any accompanying data on the source of funds or customer records. A team leader reported, "The majority of these cases involve customers who are people of color or immigrants. These numbers are not a coincidence." Marcus listened, paused for a few seconds, then said, "We will not hide this report. When we send it to the committee, leave the numbers exactly as they are. Everyone needs to see how serious this problem is." The next day, Linda Moore appeared on a local TV channel for an exclusive interview. "I've been made a scapegoat," Linda said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "I was just following the protocol leadership put in place. If they want change, they should start from the top down." The reporter asked, "Do you think you discriminated against Mr. Ellison?" Linda avoided looking directly at the camera. "I don't think so, but maybe he thinks otherwise." The comment immediately sparked debate. Some argued Linda was merely a victim of the system, while others said she was refusing to take personal responsibility. Instead of responding directly, Marcus chose to appear on a national finance program. Sitting across from the host in a grey suit and red tie, his tone was calm. "If I, with all my power and resources, can still be treated this way, imagine how many others have been through this with no ability to act. This is not my story alone. This is the story of an industry that needs to look in the mirror." He also announced his plan. 1. A complete review of all transaction verification procedures. 2. A retraining of staff with a mandatory anti-bias compliance module. 3. Installation of audio and video recording systems at every teller station. Harper & Co. launched an ad campaign titled "Every Customer, One Respect," aimed squarely at Crown Bank's situation without naming them directly. Billboards and online banners subtly contrasted a smooth transaction with a transaction questioned. Anthony brought Marcus a market analysis report. "They're using our situation to pull customers. Searches for Harper & Co. are up 22% this week." Marcus simply smiled. "Good. Competition will force us to improve faster." Unexpectedly, a coalition of civil rights organizations sent an open letter supporting Marcus, praising him for acting not only to defend personal dignity, but to pave the way for systemic change. The letter was reprinted in dozens of newspapers, transforming the story from a scandal into a symbol of reform. That evening, Marcus stood alone in his office, looking out over the brightly lit city. Down below, bank branches were still open, customers still transacting, but he knew he had lit a spark under the entire industry. He repeated what he had told Anthony the day before. "A bank cannot claim to protect customers if it chooses who deserves to be served, and I will make sure Crown Bank is no longer that kind of bank." The glow of his phone screen reflected on his face. A new message appeared from Derek Vaughan. "Just wanted to say thank you for not letting this slide." Marcus nodded slightly. The wave had begun, and this time it would sweep away many of the rot that had long been thought untouchable. 1 week after the incident at Branch 5, the atmosphere inside Crown Bank was no longer just about media crisis management. It had become a formal investigation. On Monday morning, Marcus Ellison received a summons from the Federal Banking Oversight Committee. The message was brief. "Mr. Marcus Ellison, as Chief Executive Officer of Crown Bank, you are required to attend a public hearing on cash transaction procedures at 10 a.m. Thursday at the committee headquarters." It also stated clearly, "Mandatory witness, Derek Vaughan, Security Officer, Crown Bank Branch 5. Anthony walked into Marcus's meeting room carrying a file nearly 5 centimeters thick. We have 3 days to prepare. The committee will ask about every aspect: internal procedures, transaction denial rates, and discriminatory factors. Marcus nodded, flipping quickly through the pages. I want real numbers. No edits, no polishing. If the report doesn't reflect the truth, the hearing will be a nightmare. My head of legal, Clara Bennett, added, You should be ready for them to ask you directly, why did this incident happen to you personally? Your answer will shape the entire narrative. Marcus replied simply, I'll tell the truth. No sugarcoating. Linda Moore, though already terminated, also received a summons from the committee as a related party. She sat in her small apartment, reading the lines with a slight tremor in her hands. Next to her, a union-appointed attorney cautioned, You have the right to remain silent on anything that could incriminate you. But remember, if you try to blame the process without evidence, the committee won't believe you. Linda bit her lip. She knew that what happened that day wasn't just about process. It was about the glance of bias the moment Marcus approached the counter. The committee building in Washington, D.C. was unusually crowded that morning. Reporters, cameras, and journalists filled the halls. The hashtag #BankingBias was trending again. Marcus walked into the hearing room in a deep blue suit and red tie, his gaze calm but sharp. Derek Vaughan followed right behind, holding a small notebook with a timeline of events. Across the table, Linda sat with her lawyer, avoiding eye contact with Marcus. Committee Chairwoman Evelyn Carter began, Mr. Ellison, please describe the events of the 12th of this month at Branch 5. Marcus didn't open any notes. He looked straight at the panel. I walked into the bank I founded and requested to withdraw $15,000 from my personal account. Before me, another customer withdrew $25,000 without any checks. I provided all required identification, yet I was denied with the explanation that it was a suspicious transaction. When I asked for the basis of this assessment, they gave no answer. Instead, they called security, and I was pushed outside. A committee member asked, What do you believe the real reason was? Profiling. Judging based on appearance instead of account data. Marcus pulled from his pocket a printed copy of Section 4.3 of the Customer Service Protocol and read aloud, All cash transactions over $10,000 must be verified based on current account data. Subjective criteria cannot be used as grounds for denial. He placed the paper firmly on the table. Section 4.3 was not applied in my case. Derek stood and spoke clearly. I witnessed the entire incident. Mr. Ellison presented ID, filled out the form, followed all procedures. Minutes before, a white customer withdrew a larger amount without any checks. When Mr. Ellison asked why the difference in treatment, the manager signaled for security. I was the one who returned his ID after it had been thrown to the ground. A committee member asked, Mr. Vaughan, have you seen similar cases before? Yes, many times. Most involved customers of color or immigrants. I couldn't always intervene. When it was her turn, Linda began in a trembling voice. I was following anti-money laundering procedures. I thought, Chairwoman Carter interrupted. Ms. Moore, the procedure requires you to check account data before making a decision. Did you? Linda lowered her head. No. The room fell into silence. At the end, Carter read a preliminary conclusion. Based on testimony and evidence, The committee finds that Crown Bank Branch 5 violated Section 4.3 and showed signs of applying subjective criteria in a discriminatory manner. Crown Bank must submit a remediation plan within 30 days, including a new monitoring process and mandatory training for all employees. Stepping out of the building, Marcus was immediately surrounded by reporters. "Mr. Ellison, do you feel vindicated?" He stopped and replied briefly, "This isn't about vindicating me. This is about thousands of other customers. If we don't change, there will be many more hearings like this." Derek stood beside him, seeing for the first time a hint of relief on Marcus's face. Anthony entered later and placed a fax from the committee headquarters on Marcus's desk. "They appreciate our cooperative attitude. They will monitor the implementation of the new procedures over the next 6 months." Marcus nodded. "Then we start now. We're not wasting those 6 months." He opened his laptop and typed an email to all branch managers. "Starting tomorrow, all cash transactions over $10,000 will be recorded on video and audio and archived for a minimum of 20 for 4 months. Any employee who violates this will be suspended immediately. This is not just a new rule, it's a promise to our customers." Outside, the city lights were already on. Marcus sat by the window, looking down at the busy streets. He knew he had just laid the first stone for a new foundation, not just for Crown Bank, but for the way the entire industry views fairness. He took a sip of coffee and smiled slightly. The legal storm may have passed, but the wave of change had only just begun. 3 weeks after the hearing in Washington, D.C., the atmosphere inside Crown Bank was completely different. Gone were the downcast eyes when Marcus walked by, replaced by a tense silence mixed with anticipation. Everyone knew he had not only won in the hearing room, he was changing the very DNA of the organization. From the 38th floor, Marcus looked down at Wall Street glowing under the city lights. He thought back to the early days of building the bank, a small office with 12 employees, founded on 3 values: transparency, respect, and efficiency. But over time, as the bank grew, those values had been diluted, replaced by mechanical routines and indifference. Today, he was determined to bring them back. Anthony stepped into the main conference hall, where over 200 branch managers from across the United States had gathered. On the massive LED screen behind him, the words read, "Anti-bias compliance. Never let subjectivity defeat data." Marcus walked to the podium without papers, without a teleprompter, and spoke plainly. 30 days ago, I was denied a transaction at the bank I founded. The official reason? Suspicious transaction. The real reason? A subjective judgment not based on data. That not only violated Section 4.3, it broke the foundation of customer trust. He paused, scanning the room. If anyone here thinks this was just an individual mistake, I'll be clear. No. This is a systemic problem, and we are going to fix it. Clara Bennett, head of legal, presented the new rules: mandatory video and audio recording for all transactions over 10,000, an automated alert system requiring staff to enter reasons with verification data before denying a transaction, a secure hotline directly to the CEO's office for customers to report discrimination, and quarterly bias, awareness scoring for every employee to measure and improve awareness. Managers scribbled notes. Some nodded in agreement. Others frowned slightly. Marcus knew there would be quiet resistance, but these rules were not optional. The press reported Crown Bank's new policy as an unprecedented hard-line move in the financial industry. Civil rights organizations praised the action, while some rival banks quietly began studying how to implement similar measures. On Twitter, the hashtag #FairBanking appeared alongside a photo of Marcus shaking hands with a customer at a branch in Atlanta. One standout comment read, "If every CEO stood at the teller counter like he does, the world would be different." One afternoon, Marcus visited Branch 5. Derek was still on security duty, but his expression had changed, more confident, more assured. "Mr. Ellison," Derek smiled, "this branch now has cameras at every counter, and the staff, they're a lot more respectful." Marcus shook his hand. "That's because you spoke the truth when it mattered." Derek shook his head. "Because you didn't let it slide. Back then, I thought if I spoke up, I'd lose my job. Now I know I made the right choice." Marcus pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This is an invitation to join Crown Bank's Security Advisory Board. We need people like you to make sure these new rules don't just stay on paper." Derek's eyes lit up. In just 2 months, Crown Bank's discrimination complaints dropped by 46%. The automated alert system flagged over 300 unjustified denials, forcing staff to review them before finalizing. A financial magazine wrote, "Crown Bank has turned crisis into competitive advantage. From a cautionary tale of poor governance, they are becoming the new standard for transparency." One late evening, Marcus received a call from Richard Harper, CEO of Harper & Co., a direct competitor. "Marcus, I don't usually do this, but you've made the whole industry take a hard look at itself. We're rolling out a similar anti-bias program. I'll admit, you beat us to it." Marcus smiled. "If we all get this right, the customers will be the ones who benefit. That's why I got into banking in the first place." In a later interview, Linda Moore said, "I lost my job, but I learned the biggest lesson of my career. Real power doesn't come from the ability to say no. It comes from the responsibility to explain every decision fairly. I wish I had understood that sooner." The interview drew thousands of comments. Some criticized, some sympathized. But when Marcus read it, he simply nodded. He knew that real change doesn't come from a press release. It comes from shifts in awareness like that. One morning, Marcus walked into Branch 5 again. No judgmental glances, no withdrawal slips pushed back. Just a young teller smiling brightly. "Welcome, Mr. Ellison. What transaction would you like to make today?" He replied softly, "A withdrawal, and to check how well the new system works." As he walked out, he knew one thing. His story had gone far beyond the 15,000 that day. It had become a reminder to an entire industry that fairness is not a slogan. It is an action repeated every single day. 3 months after the incident at Branch 5, Marcus Ellison left home earlier than usual. There were no meetings on his calendar, no TV invitations. Instead, he drove his black sedan more than 2 hours out of Manhattan to a small town. His destination was Branch 72, one of Crown Bank's newest locations, chosen as a pilot model for the Transaction Transparency Program he and Anthony had designed. Stepping inside, he didn't reveal who he was. Just a light blue shirt, khaki pants, and a cross-body bag. He queued like any other customer observing each transaction. Whenever a client requested a large withdrawal, the teller smiled, entered the details into the system, and showed the customer the on-screen verification steps. There was no hesitation, no judgmental glance. When it was his turn, Marcus requested to withdraw $20,000. The young teller, Olivia Tran, said, "Sir, this is a transaction over $10,000, so I'll need to run verification according to our protocol. It should take about 3 minutes. Would you like to wait in the lounge?" Her voice was clear, her manner professional. The system displayed the verification result in just 90 seconds. No irregularities found. Transaction approved. "Thank you, Olivia. You did very well," Marcus said, introducing himself for the first time. She froze slightly, her eyes widening as she realized. "You are, yes, and you've just shown me exactly why this process is worth implementing." A week later, Anthony sent a report. Complaints about discrimination were down 63% compared to the same period last year. The success rate for first attempt transactions over 10,000 had risen from 72% to 96%. Average processing time for large transactions had dropped by 40% thanks to the automated verification system. Marcus read the report, then set it down. These weren't just good numbers. They were proof that change had taken root. At a banking industry conference in Chicago, Marcus ran into Richard Harper again. This time, instead of a competitor, Richard extended his hand. "Marcus, we just signed a contract to buy the same automated verification system your bank uses. Looks like you didn't just change Crown Bank. You pulled us along, too." Marcus answered with a faint smile. "When the whole industry moves forward, the customers are the ones who win." At Branch 5, Derek Vaughan had long since left his security post to become Crown Bank's National Transaction Security Advisor. He traveled across states, training security teams and frontline staff. In one training session in Texas, Derek told the story of that day. "I stood there, saw the injustice, and I spoke up. If I'd stayed silent, everything would have faded away." The lesson here isn't just for guards or tellers. It's for all of us. Speak when you see wrong. Linda Moore, after a long silence, appeared on a community program to share her work experience and her mistakes. She said, "I lost a lot, but I gained the understanding that power doesn't lie in the ability to say no, but in the responsibility to use data to make fair decisions. If I could go back, I'd choose differently." Marcus happened to catch the program. He didn't call, didn't send a letter, but he felt a quiet sense of closure. Emails and handwritten letters to the CEO's office came in more than ever. One customer in New Orleans wrote, "I was once denied a withdrawal for being unusual. Last week, I tried again. The teller checked the system immediately, smiled and processed my transaction. I couldn't believe I walked out of the bank feeling respected." Marcus kept that letter on his desk as a reminder of the real goal. In September, Crown Bank held a press conference to announce the results of 6 months of the new protocol. Marcus stood beside Anthony and Derek, rather than senior executives. "Today," Marcus began, "we're not just reporting numbers, we're affirming this. A bank cannot be strong if it isn't fair. We will continue to monitor and improve, and if we find violations, we will act, no matter who it is." A reporter asked, "Do you think there will ever be a day when there are no more cases of discrimination?" Marcus replied, "I think there will always be risk. But the important thing is that when it happens, The system and the people must have the courage to fix it. That afternoon, back home, Marcus opened an old journal where he had recorded the earliest days of building the bank. He added a new line: Day X, Month Y, 2025. We've taken a long step forward, not just to save an image, but to restore trust. Outside the window, the sunset washed over the city. Marcus knew his story would eventually be replaced by others in the headlines. But what he left behind, a more transparent system, a more vigilant team, and thousands of customers who felt respected, would outlast any sensational headline. 3 months after the public announcement of the results, Marcus Ellison hosted a customer gathering in the grand hall of Crown Bank's headquarters. The space was elegant, with warm golden light spilling down like a stream of honey. But what made the room truly stand out wasn't the architecture or the furnishings. It was the faces present. Customers from across the states, of every race, age, and profession, some in tailored suits, others in simple T-shirts, had come together for one shared reason. They wanted to see whether this bank had truly changed. Marcus didn't stand on a high stage. He chose a round table in the center of the room so everyone could look him straight in the eye. An elderly man with silver hair rose to speak. I've been banking with Crown Bank for 25 years, but there was a time when I felt like I didn't belong here. Last week, I tried a large transaction just to see, and everything went smoothly. No one looked at me with suspicion. Thank you. A young woman followed. I'm an immigrant. Last year, when I withdrew money to open a nail salon, I was told to wait for the manager. This time, it took me only 2 minutes, and I was called by my name, not that lady. Marcus listened without interrupting. He knew these were not just compliments. They were the real measure of progress. Derek Vaughan stepped up with a microphone, recounting briefly the story from 3 months earlier, when his boss had been pushed out the door. If I had stayed silent that day, maybe nothing would have changed. But I spoke up. And today, looking around this room, I know I was right. Applause erupted, long and steady, not just for Derek, but for everyone who had chosen not to look away when faced with wrongdoing. Marcus stood, his voice steady but deliberate. We often think power lies in position, in title, in the ability to sign an order, but I've learned that true power lies in the ability to ensure someone is treated fairly without needing to know who they are. He looked around the room. That day I was underestimated, but that moment opened the door for Crown Bank to become a better version of itself. And I promise, we will not let what we've achieved today disappear tomorrow. 3 weeks after the event, the National Banking Association announced a new code of conduct, which included a clause almost identical to Crown Bank's anti-bias system. Major banks began implementing processes for recording and verifying data before making decisions. The media called it the Crown Bank effect. Late at night, when the hall was empty, Marcus sat alone. He looked out at the brightly lit streets, recalling Emily's cold stare, Linda's complicit nod, and Tom Harris's firm grip on his arm that day. All of it felt like it had happened just yesterday. But now, those images were only the starting point for a much larger story, one that every employee, every customer, and every branch was continuing to write each day. He thought to himself, a bank may be a place to store money, but trust is the most valuable capital of all. In the financial industry, people often talk about data, processes, and profits. But in reality, the numbers are only the surface. What determines the survival of a bank is not its quarterly profit margin, but the trust of its customers in its fairness. The story of Marcus Ellison reveals a simple truth that many organizations forget. Power does not lie in the ability to say no to a transaction, but in the responsibility to explain it fairly to every customer, no matter who they are. On that day, a man who had been underestimated became the catalyst for an entire industry to take a hard look at itself. And that change did not come from a marketing campaign, but from one decision: not to overlook injustice when it happens right in front of you. As the one telling this story, I believe that each of us, whether a customer, employee, or leader, can choose to stand on the side of fairness. Because fairness is not a slogan, it is an action repeated every single day. If you believe that trust is the most valuable capital, like this video, subscribe so you won't miss more inspiring stories, and comment below with the phrase "fairness first" so we can spread this message together. Because sometimes a big change starts with just one honest statement.